Okay, this is 4.1 of geometry. Congruent figures. So congruent polygons have congruent corresponding parts, which means that their matching sides and angles are congruent. So you can either look at the picture to figure out what's congruent. So let me choose a color here. You can see that BC matches up with FG, so BC is congruent to FG. If you can't tell in the picture, you can look down at the statement, right? BC is the middle two letters. FG are the middle two letters over here. So if I match up the first two letters, AB, they match up with the first two letters of the other one, EF. And if I look at my picture, AB matches up with EF. And then each of the angles are congruent as well. So angle A is congruent to angle E. And angle H is congruent to angle D. Okay, finding congruent parts. So if HIJK is congruent to LMNO, what are the congruent corresponding parts? And so they write out all of my sides that are congruent and all the angles that are congruent. Again, if they give you the picture, you can look at the picture, or you could look at the statement here. Our got it problem, they don't give us a picture, but I can draw a picture. W, Y, S, and M, K, V. So I can draw my pictures, but it might be better in this case to look at the statement because your pictures might not be drawn correctly. So if I take the first two letters, WY, I take the first two letters over here, MK. So WY is congruent to MK. And now I'll take my second two letters, so the the YS and KV. So YS is congruent to KV. And then I can also take the first or the last letter in the first letter. So I can take SW congruent to VM. And then I can take each angle. So I can match up my first letters. So angle W is congruent to the first letter in the other one, angle M. Angle Y is congruent to angle K. And angle S is congruent to angle V. Okay, using congruent parts. So, if I know that these two triangles over here are congruent, then I can match up their parts. So, you see how angle B and angle E are congruent? You can either see that, or you can look at, oh, we weren't given a statement, so you just gotta look at it. So, those are congruent and those are marked. If I look at the other angles, angle C then must be congruent to angle F. So, if angle C is 75, then angle F must also be 75. So now if I'm looking for angle D, now I have two measures in my triangle, so I can find out what that other angle is, because 30 plus 75 plus the measure of angle D needs to equal 180. 30 plus 75 gives me 105. And I can subtract 105 from both sides. And I get the measure of angle D is 75. So let's try our own. Try to make it distinct looking triangles. So WYS is congruent to MKV if the measure of angle W is 62, and the measure of angle Y is 35. What is the measure of angle V? So if I know these are congruent, I know that W is congruent to M, so this must be 62. And I know that Y is congruent to K, either by taking it from my statement or from looking at my picture. So this is 35. So to find angle V, I know that that triangle needs to add up to 180. So 180 is equal to 62 plus 35 plus the measure of angle V. Oh, maybe I should have written that on top, but that simplifies to be 180 is equal to 97 plus the measure of angle V. I subtract 97 from both sides, and I get 83 is equal to the measure of angle V. Oops. Okay, are the triangles congruent? Justify your answers. Okay, so they tell me that, or it's marked, that AB is congruent to ED. And then if I look at the measures, I know that BC is congruent to CD because they're both marked with a 4. And I know that AC is congruent to EC because they're both marked with a 6. I am given, or it's marked on the picture, that angle A is congruent to angle E, and that angle B is congruent to angle D. And then, by the definition of vertical angles, I know that these angles are congruent there. So angle BCA is congruent to angle DCE. So then I have all angles congruent, and I have all sides congruent. So they are congruent triangles. Okay, here's our got it problem. So is triangle ABD congruent to triangle CBD? Justify your answer. So I know that AD is congruent to DC because that's given, it was marked. Here's a property that we haven't used yet. It's called the reflexive property. I could say that BD is congruent to BD by reflexive, which just means it's itself. It's kind of like reflection, like looking in a mirror. But if I had separated these triangles, I would actually have 2 BDs. It looks like I just have 1, but I'd have 2. But that's all that I know. I don't know anything about any of the other sides or the angles. So that's all I can say. So I can't say that they're congruent. There's not enough information. Okay, the third angles theorem. This says if I know that 2 angles are congruent in triangles, so B is congruent to E and A is congruent to D, then I know that C is congruent to F. And I'm not going to go through the proof right now, but basically we take the fact that I know that they add up to 180, and then I can substitute in and subtract things off. Okay, so proving triangles are congruent. Let's first walk through their proof. So I'm already given that LM is congruent to LO, and I'm given that MN is congruent to NO. They put their given, if you look at this proof, they've got given here and given here. First they do sides and then they go to angles. If you want to do all of it at once, you can, but we'll follow their way. Remember the reflexive property I said? We know that LN is congruent to LN because of the reflexive property. Now if I look at the angles that I'm given, I know that angle O is congruent to angle M. And I know that angle MLN is congruent to angle NLO. So if I'm looking at these 2 triangles, I have 2 angles congruent in each of them. So then I can use the third angles theorem to say that M and L is congruent to ONL. So that these guys are congruent. And then I could say that the triangles are congruent by the definition of congruent triangles. Remember, our definition says that all the sides are congruent and all the angles are congruent. Okay, let's give our own proof a try here. So, the first thing I can do is do the given. I'm just going to do my sides. So, AE is congruent to DC. EB is congruent to CB. And BA is congruent to BD. So that was my given. Oh, actually, I've already got that all three sides are congruent, so I'm okay. So then I will also list that angle A is congruent to angle D, because that was given. You could stick those two together if you wanted. Okay, now looking at my pictures, I know that these two angles here, angle CBD and angle EBA, are congruent because they're vertical angles. So I can write that out. Angle CBD is congruent to angle EBA by vertical angles. And then I can use my third angles theorem to say that angle E is congruent to angle C. Angle E is congruent to angle C by third angles theorem. And then I kind of ran out of room on here, but I can now say that triangle AEB is congruent to triangle DCB by the definition of congruent triangles. There's your homework.